Okay, let's get to it. It is 2:30 on the spot. Welcome to Burst of Innovation. So good to see you all here. We've got 10 minutes to do this. So let's get into why failure is truly important to innovation, because I don't think it's what you think it is. In fact, it wasn't what I thought it was. Now, before I dig in, let me just say that if you have a question for me, put it into the chat bar. I will do my best to get to them. And if I don't, I'll find other ways to answer the questions in my blogs and all that other stuff. But I'd love to hear what you have to say, comments, questions, all of that as we go through the next, now 9 minutes and 17 seconds. Okay, I've got my timer on. Here we go. Why failure is important to innovation. I think this is a critical topic because failure is one of those words that we hear a lot about, and it's become kind of a mantra in a lot of our companies. Fail fast, fail forward, love your failures. You can't succeed without failing. I'm sure you've heard it all before, and all of that is true. And it's true that failure is important to innovation, but not for those superficial reasons. I think, on one hand, it's important at that superficial level for, you got to test out and experiment and do a lot of failures to get to the right idea, the right innovation. Totally true. But that's at the superficial level. And today's time, I want us to dig a little bit deeper because I think this is where we get the impact, and this is where we become stronger leaders for our teams and our organizations. I've been doing this informal research for the last 5 years with my clients to truly understand the importance of failure in innovation, because we give it so much lip service. And here's what I discovered. There's actually 3 reasons why failure is so important to innovation. And I'm going to go through all of these in a minute, but one is it makes you, actually I should say forces you to be open to listening. It has you own your mistakes, and it gets you really, really vulnerable. Now, let me explain what I mean with all 3 of those. So number 1, open to listening. It really forces you to be willing to listen to the perspectives of others. Here's the thing, it's a little bit about ego. So when you fail, your ego can no longer kind of cover up everything with, all the right answers and, you've got the answers for everybody in the room. That ego gets broken down, and suddenly you become opening to listen in. Oh, I don't know what happened. I just shared my screen. That was weird. You become opening to innovation. Hopefully you guys can still see me. It's so awkward. So number 1 is open to listening, right? The ego breaks down, and in that failure, you have these moments of being forced to be opening to listening. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I was 24 years old, I actually tried to start a fitness tracking business. It was basically an online business. This was long before the Internet of Things as we know it today. And people kept telling me, you're 12 years too early. It'll never work. The gyms will never go for it. You're going to have a hard time finding partnerships. And you know what? I would resist them every step of the way because my ego was telling me, no, I know all the answers. I know exactly what I'm doing, until I failed epically. Then I was being forced to listen to what other people had to say. But you know what? It was in that failure and suddenly having my ears open to what other people said, because I just discovered I don't have all the answers. That's when I discovered the real innovation. So failure becomes important to innovation because it forces us to listen to others. And I think over time we get better at this, at listening to others. But failure forces that because you have nowhere else to go. And I think that's actually a really important and really powerful thing. All right, the second reason that that failure is important to innovation is because it forces us to own our mistakes. When you fail, you can't run or you can't hide, or I guess you can, but it's actually a lot harder. You have to own your mistakes. And when you own your mistakes, you actually see them for what they really are. And that's when you can build real and meaningful solutions and innovation around them. It's very easy for us to give excuses, to blame somebody else. I call it the they syndrome. Do you know that syndrome where it's like they didn't do what they were supposed to do? They didn't pick up the ball and run with it. Whatever they is, at the end of the day, doesn't matter, because when we play at that level, we create innovation that's superficial and meaningless. But when we fail, we got to own it. We have no choice. I had a boss once that failed epically, publicly, And he was that guy who never owned anything. Everything was everybody else's fault until that happened. And in that moment, he became accountable for his mistakes. And when he did that, his game changed completely. And he became open to innovation. And he actually found it because he was willing to own his mistakes and see them for what they really are. Now, the third reason that failure is important to innovation in the way that we don't think it is because it forces you to get really, really vulnerable. Do you know what I mean? Like, you got to admit you don't know what you're doing, you have no idea what's happening. That actually creates space for innovation that we didn't have before. So when I was young, younger is what I'm supposed to say, I guess. When I was younger, I was promoted to a senior executive in this global communications firm in New York, and I was the youngest executive on the team. And I had no idea what I was doing at all. But I went by the whole mantra of fake it till you make it, right? We all have that a little bit in our lives of like, hey, if you don't know, just pretend. Confidence wins. So I went into kind of every situation like that with this just mask of confidence on and faking it till I made it. And I'll never forget my first big presentation to the bigwigs. And this is the one where I had to tell them, here are the revenue streams we're going to launch. Here's how we're going to launch it. Here's the resources I need. This was a huge meeting for me. And I bombed. And when I say I bombed, I don't mean didn't go well, could have done better. Tamara, you're being too hard on yourself. No, I bombed. No way around it. And I'll never forget because I walked back to my office and just slumped in my chair because I knew what had just happened. And one of my bosses, one of the people that hired me, came into my office, and he said, Tamara, you bombed that. And I thought I was going to get fired in that moment. He said, listen, I need you to ask for help when you need it. We didn't hire you because of what you know. We hired you because we think you can take us further. But if you're going to do this, you got to get vulnerable and you got to ask for help. That's the only way you're going to find the answers. And then he stormed right on out of my office. But I will never forget what he said to me that day about getting vulnerable. And that was the moment that shifted the trajectory of my career and helped me find that innovation because I was willing to get vulnerable. So I think oftentimes when we talk about failure and innovation, we talk about it as, the iterative process or the system of failure. And that's all, like I said in the beginning, fine. That's the superficial level of why failure is important, right? We got to experiment to find the right answer. We've got to try new things. We've got to take risks. That's all true. But I think on the human side, failure is important to innovation because it forces us to listen. The ego gets broken down and we're open to other people's perspectives. And when we do that, we find cross-pollination of idea. And the reality is we don't have all the answers on our own. So it's important that we listen to other people and pull those pieces together. So it forces us to be open and willing to do that. The ego gets pushed aside and broken down. The second thing is it forces us to own our mistakes. And this isn't so much about accountability for me, although you know me, accountability is very important to me. This is also about seeing things for what they really are. And you can't see them when you're trying to hide from them. You can't innovate when you can't see things clearly. Failure forces us to own our mistakes. And the third one is getting vulnerable, which I know is so hard, but that vulnerability builds trust. It allows you to get the perspective and the help that you need to innovate. And I think that's a little bit of an ego thing in the way too, right? We want to look like we know all the answers. We want to look perfect. So open to listening, own your mistakes, and get vulnerable. That's why failure is so critical to culture and to people when it comes to innovation. Yes, I agree, Yorm, that trust is a prerequisite for vulnerability, without a doubt. But you know what? Also, sometimes you got to get vulnerable to build that trust. It doesn't always happen the other way around. You're really vulnerable with people who you trust, and people who you trust get vulnerable. So I think you got to be the first to do it. In fact, the other question that just came in privately was, well, what if I'm not a leader? How do I get to that? Here's the thing. Leadership, as a lot of us will tell you, is not really about title. It's about influence. It's about going above and beyond. It's about wanting to be proactive. Someone's got to be the first person out there to make this happen. So if you're a leader out there of any level, to John's question, here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about how you can start going into meetings and breaking down those egos, and you being the first person to say, hey, I don't know the answer to this, or hey, I think we need to explore this further because I'm not sure, or hey, here's what worked. And also, by the way, oops, that's the timer for 10 minutes. Here's what didn't work. You've got to be the first person to do that. And what I have discovered, what I found in my experience is that when you do that, other people will follow suit, and you'll start to build a culture where failure is really accepted. It's not accepted because you have to do it fast. It's accepted because you have a culture where people are willing to be a part of it, and where failure becomes acceptable in a more human way. All right, that 10 minutes is up. I can't believe how fast this goes. I'm gonna have to extend it to 15. You guys have to let me know what you think. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any other questions, and to any questions I didn't get to, I'll try to get to them in the blogs and vlogs and all the other places. You're all amazing. Thank you for showing up today. Can't wait to talk more.